life. This work is a work in progress. And most people, when they die, the work continues to progress because they have not reached that point where they're ready for the beatific vision of God. So we have the doctrine of purgatory, the place of purifying, or rather the state of purification. And we know that after death something happens to prepare us for the vision of God. And we know love designed it. St. Teresa, somebody asked her, you think you'll go to purgatory? And she said, well, I don't think so. Because I've never said no to God about anything. But if I do, I know that His love has sent me. So it must be good. And I think that we don't always understand the time after death as part of our work in progress. And it really is. Love requires that we not forget those who have died because they are still working. And I'd like to give you some stories. You probably have heard all of mine before, but they're powerful and important. When I lived in Chandler, I was teaching at Seton High School. I had just been made a priest, and I always had an affection for those who have died, like, what can I do? But I didn't have a big devotion to them. I don't think I understood it. I was raised Protestant. You're dead, that's it. You're judged, that's it. It's all taken care of. And of course it isn't. So I prayed about that. And one day I was also the pastor, the administrator at Queen Creek, which is a little mission out here. It was then very little. And one day I got a box from Sheboygan, Wisconsin. And in it were holy cards of dead people. Some of them really old. I mean, I dumped this I sit on the floor of the bedroom. Nancy is at her desk doing lesson plans for teaching. And I sit on the floor of the bedroom and I dump this box on the floor. And it's tons of holy cards of dead people. And I said, Nancy, some little old lady has sent me all these. I'll bet she went to every one of these funerals in Sheboygan. Either she sent them to the missions, like, what are we going to do with them? Or she want to throw them away. Or the family, maybe she died and the family sent them from Sheboygan. I never wrote to find out. And I was going to take them to the dumpster. And Nancy said, well, maybe God wanted you to have those. Wives have this maddening clarity about things and come up with things that we don't see. They are such a compliment. And I said, well, so I looked at it and I saw this edge of one of them sticking out that was fancy. So I pulled it out. And I said, oh, this is a Monsignor, Dominic Phil. Doesn't that sound like some old tough German? And his picture, he's got this snowy white cloud of hair, and he looks like the Kaiser. He's just strong. He must have been a powerful, powerful man in his day. And I didn't know anything about him, never had heard of him before. So I said, oh, I wonder what else is in here. And I saw one with a black edge. So I pulled that out. That was the death of Monsignor Phil. And then I looked and I found another one that had a gold edge. None of these were in view. And I pulled it out and it was Monsignor Phil's Jubilee. Can you believe it? 3 in a row. I thought they must all be him. And then I pulled another large, it was big, it was like that. And it was halfway sticking out. I pulled it, it's his investiture. It shows him in his new duds as a Monsignor. All the frills, he's looking very regal. And I said, Nancy, they're all him. She said, well, look and see. So I started counting them in piles of 25. Anything that was Dominic Phil, I threw in an extra pile. When I got done, there were 1,340 cards. 3 or 4 were Monsignor Phil. So it was evident that I was being visited by this dead priest who wanted all these people prayed for. So I called Sheboygan. And do you know anything about this man? Nobody even heard of him. He'd dead too long. Died in the 20s. He'd dead before I was born. And I thought, my goodness. So I put the word out, and some woman from Holy Spirit Parish called me. She said, I was supposed to be married by Dominic Phil when he was too old, and she was old herself. And I don't know when. I'll have to look and see when he died. Anyway, she was old, like 80-something, and so we can figure it out. She said the last minute he got sick and they put in a different priest. But I remember one thing about him. His family paid for the organ in the new church. He built the church. The church sat like a monument in the town. She said he visited every single person who was dying. He loved to minister to the dying. So, anyway, there's a story. And so I decided, all right, I'm going to say one Mass for every person in this box. And I went to Queen Creek and I took a stack of them, two little stacks about that high, and I put them on a little shelf in the sacristy. And I took the rest over to St. Thomas, where I was doing Byzantine liturgy, and I put them there. Every day when I would go out there for morning Mass and when we had the daily Masses, I would take one card, put it on top of my chalice, carry it in, sit it down, and of course there's Mass intentions that people pay for, but I'd read that, and then I'd look at the card. And then I'd name that person in my heart, and I'd put it down. And when I was done, then I'd put that card away. I think I stuck them in the top of the altar in a hole. They might still be there. Some of them I think are here. And crazy things started happening. I'd pull one off, and it'd be the same calendar date as the calendar date today. That happened repeatedly. It must have happened a dozen times. The same exact calendar date. And I thought, what's going on? It just affirmed it. And then one day, I left the sacristy and I came out, I put my card on the altar. I'm ready to start Mass, and you get this feeling that you left something on, or something isn't right, you forgot something. I'm looking around, I got water, I got wine, I got bread, I got the books, I got my card, what's missing? I left the altar with 15 or 20 people sitting there, went back in the sacristy and looked around. And over on the floor, under the cards, was a card on the floor. And I thought, well, all right, they're going to be two this morning. I picked it up and put it next to the other one. When I got to the offertory, I looked down. It was husband and wife. Things like that happen day in and day out. I would come home and tell Nancy, all excited, What does that mean? I never went to a Catholic seminary. I took examinations. And God taught me the importance of prayers for the dead from a wonderful old priest who did it and passed these cards on to me. We are so connected. St. Teresa said, we will only when we die will realize how connected we were to people in heaven, many of whom we never heard of. Tony Black, a neighbor across the street when I lived in the rectory over here. Tony was doing drugs. Bad kinds of drugs. The kinds of drugs that turn you paranoid. And he would sit in the back at Life Teen. Darren was the Life Teen director at that time. Maybe remembers Tony. Tony wouldn't communicate. He'd just sit in the very back row because his family forced him to come. And his grandmother is from Vietnam. She spent her life on her knees for her family, this boy included. But he got with a bad crowd and he got into drugs. Nothing his parents could do stopped it. They just kept doing what they could. And a wonderful family. And finally, one day he stole a car from a friend, stole his dad's service revolver, and shot himself to death. Down here on, I think, Higley and Guadalupe, or somewhere down that area. Of course, his family was devastated. They were just turned inside out over this. They didn't cause this. They had to suffer it. But Tony, every time I'd walk by him in the back of the church, I'd walk back there and I'd say, hey, Tony. And he wouldn't look up. He'd grunt something. No, what Father? He was respectful in a reluctant sort of way. And when I would preach or be up there and I'd look back, Tony never looked up. He just tolerated this hour that he had to be there. But something was sinking in. And finally, when it came to the funeral, I asked God to help me minister to the family and to their needs, and we did that and supported Mom and Dad in the midst of all this. There were a lot of police officers because his dad's a highway patrolman. And they were here. It was a real sad day. And then I put his name in my book. I got this book. It's always on the altar. This is the 4-3, right? I keep having to get a bigger book. And Tony's name went in there. But I put it on a piece of paper and stuck it on the bookmark. So every Mass I had, I was also remembering Tony for a whole year. And then at the end of that time, Steve Shack, who was a seminarian at the time, came home. And I had to bury a little baby, and I said, Steve, why don't you chauffeur me? I never have a seminarian to chauffeur me around. Chauffeur me out there, and we'll show you how we do this service for the little child, and we can talk. So we did, and he just got a different car, so I felt pampered, and he drove me out there, and I said, park on the other side of the cemetery. We'll walk. It's a nice day. I always parked right next to where the body's going to be. So we did, and way around the back side of Queen of Heaven. And we walked across the grass and met the family and ministered to them. And then we're on the way back to the car, walking slow because it's a gorgeous day. It's not real hot. And he's telling me all about St. Meinrad Seminary, all of his experiences. I'm drinking it up. And halfway across the cemetery property, somebody was behind me. And I thought, oh, they've come after, they've come to tell me something. And usually Pat does that. She works out there, and she'll come and follow. And Father, well, nobody said anything. And I turn around, there's nobody there. But you know when somebody's standing behind you. And I looked down, and Tony Black was his grave. And when I looked down, I heard, so help me God, I am also, like Paul, certifiable. He said, in a voice that was full of love, gratitude, humility, holiness. It was an angelic, but it was Tony's voice. And he said, Father, thank you. That was it. I just froze. And I didn't talk to Steve about it. He said, what's going on? I said, I'll tell you another time. I couldn't talk. And all that went through my mind was ministering to his mom and dad and his family and saying the masses for him. And what I understood in that moment was that he never left the cemetery. That's where his purgatory was. I believe that Tony Black, for what he did to his family and to himself, had, by the grace of God, to suffer through thinking about this and to see his family coming to visit him and all the rest. I think that's where he suffered it. And Padre Pio said that people often suffer purgatory here, that God will put him in a certain place. And I believe that morning his purgation was finished. He was reduced to love. I wish I could, go back there and stand there and feel that again. Because you actually, in your spirit, you actually feel this holy person. He was so entirely different. Gentle, at peace, full of love. Everything God intended that kid to be. See, he does forgive the sins of our youth. And especially if we're young and get into drugs and something else, he's going to forgive all that. Because his interest is not in punishing you. His interest is in bringing you to just exactly what he brought Tony to. And in this case, pious parents at prayer all his life for him, and the drugs mitigated everything. And God did his number on Tony, but he made him suffer. I would guess that year in that cemetery tore his spirit apart. But it humbled him and reduced him to love. My best friend was killed in high school when we were seniors. I was away at boys' high school in Lutheran High School in St. Paul, and Billy was still in our class back in my hometown. And he was out hunting rabbits with a friend of his, and they hit a train. I didn't understand how they could slide into a train. Billy was a good driver, and he wheeled that old pickup everywhere. And he's a farm kid. He knew all those roads. I thought, how can he slide into a train? Because most of the grades are up a little bit. And but anyway, he was killed. And I've said masses for him for years. About 3 years ago, just before my mom died, I went home to see her. And some guy in the next apartment said, oh, I would like to take you on a tour of some of the places out here, the cemetery where my mother's buried, all this sentimental trip, his trip. But I was stuck because my mom said yes, and so I'm in this car in mosquito heaven, riding around in this grassy wonderland of Minnesota, which I love, but it's not dry enough. And you get used to desert. And so we've left the cemetery where his relatives are buried, and we're going so. And all of a sudden, we come to this area where you just drive straight down. At the bottom, there's a railroad track, and then you go back straight up again. And Mom leaned over, and this guy's just going talking away about his family. Mom leaned over and said, "This is where Billy was killed." And in that moment, I just was like, I was supposed to be there. And that very afternoon, I got lost. Can you get lost in a town of 7,000? I grew up there. I rode my bicycle in every street. I got lost. And I came to a street that didn't continue I got lost because it was a new street. At the end of it was a nursing home. And I said, "What am I doing here? How can we get to this street?" Mom said, "I don't know, but that's the nursing home your grandmother died in. My grandma Dina, who was precious to me. She was a saint." So it's almost like fate took me to these two places where these two important people in my life had died. Why? I don't know. There was no big experience with it, but I knew that I was where I needed to be at that moment, and I prayed for them. Probably the most puzzling one happened at Notre Dame in Paris a few years ago. It was my first time in that church. I mean, that's historic. What's more historic than Notre Dame in Paris? There isn't any church in the world more historic than that. I think it's got more history to it than St. Peter's in Rome. And I didn't like it. I went inside, I didn't like this church. It was cold, it was dirty, everything was dripping dust, and they didn't keep things up, it didn't look nice. People march through there by the thousands every day. It's just like a museum. And I thought, where is there a place to pray in here? Where can I find a corner? And we came up around the front where the choir stalls are. Now that's where the clergy sit, and they sit facing each other. The hoi polloi are out there, and here are all the clergy, and the altar's up there. Well, I came around the corner, and the second row, I looked up at the second row of these seats are carved, beautiful, and right above it was a beautiful carving of Mary Magdalene. But when I came around, my attention was drawn there, and I looked over there, and here was this immense love and humility and peace, the same thing I experienced at the cemetery with Tony. But this is years before that. And not a word, nothing, just this person sitting there that I couldn't see, who was pouring out more love and more peace, holy. I didn't want to move. And of course the tour guide says, "Move along, Father, come on, come. There's others behind us that have to see this." I didn't want to move. I froze right there. I held onto the rail. And I just stared at that place. It felt so good. And so I got home and I kept praying, who was that? And I thought, well, maybe it's somebody who had to do their purgation in that chair because they watched the Jews being shoved through the wall out the back window of Notre Dame when they were hauled off to the concentration camps. The clergy at Notre Dame did nothing to stop it. Nothing. And I thought, maybe this person is suffering still. That's a long time ago. And I got home, and I'm sitting in my prayer room praying, and I said, I really would like to know who that is. I'll pray for them, but I think they're already done. And I went over and I opened a big book I have on St. Teresa, my favorite saint, because I was reading it at the time. And it fell open. It's a thick book. And I put it on my lap, and I went to open it, and my finger slipped, and it just flopped open. And here's this picture, and here's this man, and his name is Father Hyacinth Loyson. And I wasn't going to read it. I was going to go back to where my mark was. But I read it. Turns out Father Hyacinth Loyson was a heretic. He was a Carmelite priest who didn't agree with the papal definition of infallibility. And he didn't like the idea that priests couldn't get married. He was an intellectual and a brilliant speaker. And guess what? He drew capacity crowds at Notre Dame, where he preached this drivel to the applause of the intellectuals. And that's probably the chair he sat in before he got up to speak. All I could think about was, okay, why? I read more. Turns out, he was so notorious, he ended up marrying a widow from the United States and starting his own church. That's big time heresy and schism and all the rest of it. And the whole convent that Teresa lived in was praying for the conversion of Hyacinth Wayson, that he would come back to the church. When Teresa died, he hadn't come back yet, though he'd given up his new church that he founded. And she died. Her last Holy Communion, God's synchronicity is wonderful. Her last Holy Communion was on the Feast of St. Hyacinth, the last one she could take and swallow. And she offered it for the conversion of Father Hyacinth Wayson, and for the terrible damage he did to the church. How many people left because of his talks, his arrogant, pompous talks, to much applause at Notre Dame. And I said, is this possible? But Teresa's, I'm like her protege. She makes me look good. She helps me. She asked for my conversion. I know she did. I've talked about that with you. And I think that he sat there for that whole time, like 100 years, and had to watch the arrogance coming in and out of that place, and watch the irreverence of the people who come in and out, and ponder what he did. I believe that was his purification, and I believe that the day I walked through there, Teresa wanted me to know him. But I didn't have to pray for him. He was already in such a state, and I felt it. You don't just feel it, you experience with your soul. My mom died, and my dad was kind of tough, but he never missed church. You know, my mom died, and my dad died a month later, to the day. And it was just at Easter time that my mother died. I buried her, I think, about a week before Easter. And when I came home from Minnesota after burying my mom, I had all the Easter Masses. And when I finished the Easter Masses, the last one was a nursing home in the afternoon. I went back to the rectory, and I was really tired. I really wanted to lay down and go to sleep, but I was too wired. And so I sat in my rocking chair and put my feet up, and I was just going to close my eyes and rest. And it was like my mom was standing right next to me, dead a week. And I had talked with her about my little brother who had died of polio when he was 5. She kept all of his stuff, and we buried it with her. But she was having difficulty. She wanted to die, but she wasn't sure what was going to happen. And I said, Mom, first thing you have to do when you die is go find Philip. Oh, yeah. That perked her right up. And I said, God will help you. And she needed to go find Philip. So that was what she died on her mind. That was on her mind. And so here I'm sitting a week later with all my Masses done. I was thanking God for the beautiful weather. It's the year we did the football field over there for Easter Mass, one of them. And all of a sudden she's standing there and somebody's standing behind her, which I discerned to be my little brother. And all she said was, I found Philip, now pray for your dad. That was it. He died 3 weeks later. And so I know the responsibility we have, because God has given me these things, I have to teach it. And if I just had to take it from a book and say, okay, I'm going to teach this because it's in the book, that's a lot different from when he teaches you firsthand the reality of these things, because you're going to teach them with conviction and mean it. I'd like to read, getting back to our Orthodox friends, a monk whose name was Michael. He was he was Latvian. And he left Latvia, went to Finland, and became a monk there at Valam, and then moved back to Russia when he was older and finished up his life as a monk in Russia. And he was of the old guard. I mean, ultra ancient conservative Orthodox monk. He prayed for as many as 800 people every night and named their names. Listen to what he says. Our bright, joyous faith teaches us that the time will come when we shall see our dear departed ones and shall live with them inseparably forever. God is boundless love. He will not separate those who were united in the bonds of love. We will rejoice with those whom we loved and with whom we shared our joys here. Our near and dear ones will be still nearer and dearer. Our mutual love will be greater. Knowing this, with what fervor we must commemorate our dead. Our timely commemoration may very well free them from everlasting suffering. How grateful they shall be to us. Our prayer for the reposed shall be as strong as our love for them was in this life. They shall be correspondingly nearer to us. True prayer of faith may bring the dead so near to us that we shall be able to feel their presence. Each time our deceased brethren are commemorated at liturgy, their souls are allowed to attend, together with angels and saints, to pray for their salvation. With what trembling hope, perhaps the soul of your dear ones waits your entrance into the holy temple of God, when you are going to request the priest to commemorate this very soul during the great and terrible sacred rite, and to pray yourself with the entire church for that soul. We should therefore keep true love for our dear departed. When we shall die, they too shall remember us at our death's hour with the same love with which we commemorate them here. This will help us, and with what tender, holy, maternal love the dead parents love their children remaining on earth, their orphans. With what angelic love the dead children love their parents who remain on earth. With what strong love married people who pass away love their remaining partner. With what pure and tender love our brothers and sisters, friends, and all true Christians love those who remain here, their relatives and friends, united with them in holy faith. What a multitude of souls awaits us over there. Never assume someone is lost. Don't ever assume that. Don't go there. You always pray as if there is complete hope for that person. You're not their judge. St. Isaac of Syria talked about you pray for everyone, even the worst of them. Did I not talk to you about the snake, Harold? I didn't talk about that in an earlier talk, did I? Well, I need to. We're almost done here. I had been reading Eastern Saints, but I had never read Isaac of Syria. And about a year and a half ago, time passes with me, so I'm not sure. Nancy and I came home one night, and it's dark. The garage door goes up, and here's this big snake. He was long, about that thick. He's long, and he is colored like a rattler. And Nancy said, "Run over it, run over it." I said, "No." And the funniest thing happened. I got full of this compassion for this dumb snake. Now, I don't like snakes. And why would I have compassion for it? And it wasn't just compassion. I felt it. I felt almost like the snake was feeling lost and threatened. I said, "He doesn't know where he is. He's out of his place." And so I got out of the car. She's screaming at me. And I got a broom, tried to sweep him out of the garage. His head was smaller than a rattler. So I thought, well, maybe he's not a rattler. And I didn't hear any rattle. And he kept striking at the broom, though. But I finally got him out of the garage, and he went around the corner into the bushes, and our front door is set back in. There are bushes on both sides. And over the top was cat claw arch, heavy, like from here to the piano. And he got in there. So we got in, closed the garage door. Nancy called the janitor. Sure, she ran over and put pads under so nothing could crawl into the garage door anymore. And I worried about that snake. So the next morning I went, "What are you doing out there?" I said, "I'm looking for Harold." "Harold, you've named this thing?" I said, "Honey, he's lost. I think this snake is somebody's pet or something, and he's lost." I felt real, genuine compassion for this animal. And but every morning I'd go out for about 2 weeks. No Harold. I'd only crawled away, but I'd always look. And one day, about 2 weeks later, my daughter came, and she's got a baby in each arm, Heather with her kids. And she gets out of her vehicle and heads, and right here where the cat claw is hanging, Harold drops right down in front of her going, she just froze. She's back in the car with the kids. She's on the phone to animal control. There's this rattlesnake hanging from a vine, and she's terrified. So animal control came, and they hauled. She swears they said he was a rattler, but they said he was nearly dead from lack of food and water. They thought they could save it. And about a week after that, I bought a book, St. Isaac of Syria, printed by the Cistercian Catholic Press. And I'm reading, and Isaac says, God's love is so wide that it includes even the demons, that he never stops loving them. And even snakes, that he has tremendous compassion. And that when we love all of creation, then our love has matured. So what God did was give me a taste of mature love just in one incident, so I'd know what it is. Isn't that interesting? Now I know what it is. I don't have that anymore. I don't walk up to a snake and feel that way, but we were up at a place up north, and I saw a little centipede, about that long, and he was stuck against a building and couldn't get loose. And I took a branch and loosened him. Nancy said, step on him. And I said, no, he's afraid, he'll go off that way. I felt a little of that compassion. But what it taught me was, my love isn't anywhere near home yet. Do you understand that? So love for even the worst of those who have died. I'd like to close with a quote from Sister Faustina Kowalska. That's her beautiful statue out in the lobby, the saint of the Divine Mercy. And when she ministered to the dying, she never assumed that they were done, that they were damned. Listen. I often attend upon the dying, and through entreaties obtain for them trust in God's mercy, and I implore God for an abundance of divine grace, which is always victorious. God's mercy sometimes touches the sinner at the last moment in a wondrous and mysterious way. Outwardly, it seems as if everything were lost, but it is not so. The soul, illumined by a ray of God's powerful final grace, turns to God in the last moment with such a power of love that in an instant it receives from God forgiveness of both sin and punishment. While outwardly it shows no sign of repentance or contrition, because souls at that stage no longer react to external things. How beyond comprehension is God's mercy? What Sister Kowalska is saying is when they're dead to the world and on their way out and aren't even conscious, God comes and whispers in their heart. And they are forgiven and embraced. So keep that in mind when somebody is dying or somebody who's pretty rotten dies. You don't know how far the mercy of God is going to extend. He knows that person in their life and what circumstances there were. He knows where he can apply a mercy without justice contradicting it. Well, I'll bet you anything, while I was talking, some people came to mind that you need to pray for. I'll bet you anything. A lot of you had names pop into your head. Well, what are you waiting for? When a name comes to mind, always pray. It can be Hail Mary for that person. I do a Jesus prayer. If it's Billy, my friend from high school, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on Billy. Forgive him all his sins. Whoever it is. If you want to pray your rope or your Jesus prayer with it, you can do it like this. Sit down in your chair at home, just close your eyes, take your rosary beads or your prayer rope. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on all the souls from all the ages. Pray 15 or 20 of those. And then, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on my mom. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on my dad. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on my brother Philip. And just start naming your relatives. And pray it with your whole heart. That's prayer for the dead. The Mass is said for them, of course. But your fervent prayer is heard. St. Silouan, the saint I talked about a lot in this series, said that for a long time his prayer life went nowhere. It was like he met a wall. He was doing his prayers, but there was no feeling in it. And finally, he took up praying for the dead again. And as soon as he did, that very day, his prayer returned to him. So to stop praying for the dead has a serious effect on our prayer life, because they listen and wait for that prayer from us.